Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stream. It's a sunny Sunday morning, and why aren't you in church? Eh? Well, since you're here, we'll continue reading Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. We're on chapter 2, The Scar. I'm just going to get comfortable. You should too. In fact, grab your book if you have it. Grab your Goblet of Fire and read with me. Read along with the words. If you want a wee bit of practice or whatever the case. Or just chill. Harry lay flat on his back, breathing hard, as though he'd been running. He had awoken from a vivid dream, with his hands pressed over his face. The old scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a lightning bolt, was burning beneath his fingers, as though someone had just pressed a white-hot wire to his skin. He sat up, one hand still on the scar, and the other reaching out in the darkness for his glasses, which were on the bedside table. He put them on, and in his bedroom came into clear focus, lit by a faint, misty orange light that was filtering through the curtains from the street lamp outside the window. Harry ran his fingers over the scar again. It was still painful. He turned on the lamp beside him, scrambling out of bed, crossed the room, opened his wardrobe, and peered into the mirror on the inside of the door. A skinny boy of 14 looked back at him, his bright green eyes puzzled under his untidy black hair. He examined the lightning bolt scar of his reflection more closely. It looked normal, but it was still stinging. Harry tried to recall what he'd been dreaming about before he had awoken. It had seemed so real. There had been two people he knew, one he didn't. He concentrated hard, frowning, trying to remember. The dim picture of a darkened room came to him. There had been a snake on the hearthrug, a small man called Peter, nicknamed Wormtail, and a high, cold voice, the voice of Lord Voldemort. Harry felt as though an ice cube had slipped down into his stomach at the very thought. He closed his eyes tightly and tried to remember what Voldemort had looked like, but it was impossible. All Harry knew is that at that moment when Voldemort's chair had swung around and he, Harry, had seen that what was sitting in it, he had felt a spasm of horror which had awoken him. Or had it been the pain in his scar? And who had that old man been? For there had definitely been an old man. Harry had watched him fall to the ground. It was all becoming so confused. Harry put his face into his hands, blocking out his bedroom, trying to hold on to the picture that was dimly lit room. It was like trying to keep water in his cupped hands. The details were now trickling away as fast as he tried to hold on to them. Lord Voldemort and Wormtail had been talking to someone they had killed, though Harry could not remember his name. They had been plotting to kill someone else. Him. Harry took his face out of his hands and opened his eyes and stared around his bedroom as though expecting to see something unusual there. As it happened, there was an extraordinary number of unusual things in his room. A large wooden trunk that stood open at the foot of his bed, revealing a cauldron, broomstick, black robes, and assorted spellbooks. Rolls of parchment littered that part of the desk that was not taken up by a large empty cage in which his snowy owl, Hedwig, usually perched. On the floor beside his bed, a book lay open. He had been reading it before he fell asleep the previous night. The pictures in this book were all moving. Men in bright orange robes were zooming in and out of sight on broomsticks, throwing a red ball to each other. Harry walked over to his book, picked it up, and watched one of the wizards score a spectacular goal by putting the ball through a 50-foot-high hoop. Then he snapped the book shut. Even Quidditch, in Harry's opinion, the best sport in the world, couldn't distract him at this moment. He placed Flying with the Cannons on his bedside table, crossed to the window and drew back the curtains to survey the street below. Privet Drive looked actually as a respectable suburban street would be expected to look in the early hours Saturday morning. All the curtains were closed, as far as Harry could see through the darkness. There wasn't a living creature in sight, not even a cat. And yet, Harry went relentlessly back to his bed and sat down on it, running a finger over his scar again. Restlessly back to his bed. Sorry, I've been distracted by something that's, I won't go into it, but something in my room's distracting me. It wasn't the pain that bothered him. Harry was no stranger to pain and injury. He had lost all the bones from his right arm once, and they had painfully regrown in a night. The same arm which had been pierced by a venomous foot-long fang not long afterwards. Only last year, Harry had fallen 30 feet from an airborne broomstick. He was used to bizarre accidents and injuries. They were unavoidable if you attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and had a knack for attracting a lot of trouble. No, the thing that was bothering Harry was that the last time the scar had hurt him, it had been because Voldemort had been close by. But Voldemort couldn't be here now. The idea of Voldemort lurking in Privet Drive was absurd. Impossible. Harry listened closely to the silence around him. He was half expecting to hear the creak of a stair or the swish of a cloak. And then he jumped slightly when he heard his cousin Dudley give a tremendous grunting snore from the next room. Harry shook himself mentally. He was being stupid. There was no one in the house except Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley, and they were plainly still asleep, their dreams untroubled and painless. Sleep was the way Harry liked the Dursleys best. It wasn't as though they were ever any help to him awake. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley were Harry's only living relatives. They were muggles, non-magic people, who hated and despised magic in any form, which meant that Harry was about as welcome in their house as dry rot. They had explained away Harry's long absences at Hogwarts over the last 3 years by telling everyone that he went to St. Brutus's secure centre for incurably criminal boys. They knew perfectly well that, as an underage wizard, Harry wasn't allowed to use magic outside of Hogwarts. But were still apt to blame him for anything that went wrong in the house. Harry had never been able to confide in them or tell them anything about his life at the wizarding school. The very idea of going to them when they awoke and telling them about his scar hurting him, about his worries about Voldemort, was laughable. And yet, it was because of Voldemort that Harry had come to live with the Dursleys in the first place. If it hadn't been for Voldemort, Harry would not have had the lightning scar on his forehead. If it hadn't been for Voldemort, Harry would still have had parents. Harry had been a year old that night that Voldemort, the most powerful dark wizard for a century, a wizard who had been gaining power steadily for 11 years, arrived at his house and killed his mother and father. Voldemort had then turned his wand on Harry and performed the curse that had disposed of so many full-grown witches and wizards in his steady rise to power, and, incredibly, it had not worked. Instead of killing the small boy, the curse had rebounded upon Voldemort. Harry had survived with nothing but a lightning-shaped cut on his forehead, and Voldemort had been reduced to something barely alive, his powers gone, his life almost extinguished. Voldemort had fled. The terror in which the secret communities of witches and wizards had lived for so long had lifted. Voldemort's followers had disbanded, and Harry Potter became famous. It had been enough of a shock for Harry to discover on his 11th birthday that he was a wizard. It was even more disconcerting to find out that everyone in the hidden wizarding world knew his name. Harry had arrived at Hogwarts to find that heads turned and whispers followed him wherever he went. But he was used to it now. At the end of the summer, he would be starting his 4th year at Hogwarts, and he was already counting the days until he would be back at the castle again. But there was still a fortnight to go before he had to go back to school. He looked hopelessly around his room again, and his eye paused on his birthday cards that two of his best friends had sent him at the end of July. What would they say if he wrote to them and told them about his scar hurting? At once Hermione Granger's voice filled his head, shrill and panicky. "Your scar hurt? Harry, that's really serious. Write to Professor Dumbledore, and I'll go and check common magical ailments and afflictions. Maybe there's something in there about cursed scars." Yes, that would be Hermione's advice. Go straight to the headmaster of Hogwarts, and in the meantime consult a book. Harry stared out the window at the inky, blue-black sky. He doubted very much whether a book could help him now. As far as he knew, he was the only living person to have survived a curse like Voldemort's. It was highly unlikely, therefore, that he would find his symptoms listed in common magical ailments and afflictions. As for informing the headmaster, Harry had no idea where Dumbledore went during his summer holidays. He amused himself for a moment, picturing Dumbledore with his long silver beard, full-length wizard robes and pointed hat, stretched out on a beach somewhere, rubbing suntan lotion onto his long, crooked nose. Wherever Dumbledore was, though, Harry was sure Hedwig would be able to find him. Harry's owl had never failed to deliver a letter to anyone, even without an address. But what would he write? "Dear Professor Dumbledore, sorry to bother you, but my scar hurt this morning. Yours sincerely, Harry Potter." Even inside his head, the words sounded stupid. And so he tried to imagine his other best friend, Ron Weasley's reaction, and in the moment, Ron's long-nosed, freckled face seemed to swim before Harry, wearing a bemused expression. "Your scar hurt? But you know who can't be near now, can he? I mean, you'd know, wouldn't you? He'd be trying to do you in again, wouldn't he? I don't know, Harry. Maybe the cursed scars always twinge a bit. I'll ask Dad." Mr. Weasley was a fully qualified wizard who worked in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office in the Ministry of Magic, but he didn't have any particular expertise in the matter of curses, as far as Harry knew. In any case, Harry didn't like the idea of the whole Weasley family knowing that he, Harry, was getting jumpy about a few moments of pain. Miss Weasley would fuss worse than Hermione, and Fred and George, Ron's 16-year-old twin brothers, might think Harry was losing his nerve. The Weasleys were Harry's favourite family in the world. He'd hoped that they might invite him to stay any time now. Ron had mentioned something about the Quidditch World Cup, and somehow he didn't want his visit punctuated with anxious inquiries into his scar. Harry kneaded his forehead with his knuckles. What he really wanted, and felt almost shameful to admit it to himself, was someone like a parent, an old adult wizard whose advice he could ask without feeling stupid, someone who cared about him, who had experience of dark magic. "Oh, hello, Eve. Welcome to the stream." And then the solution came to him. It was so simple and so obvious. He couldn't believe that it had taken him for so long. Sirius. Harry leapt up from his bed, hurried across the room, and sat down at his desk. He pulled a piece of parchment toward him, loaded his eagle-quill feather with ink, and wrote, "Dear Sirius," then paused, wondering how best to phrase the problem, and still marvelling at the fact that he hadn't thought of Sirius straight away. But then, perhaps it wasn't so surprising, after all. He had only found out that Sirius was his godfather 2 months ago. Here was a simple reason for Sirius's complete absence from Harry's life until then. Sirius had been at Azkaban, the terrifying wizard jail, guarded by creatures called Dementors, sightless, soul-sucking fiends who had come to search for Sirius at Hogwarts when he escaped. Yet Sirius hadn't been innocent. The murders for which he had been convicted he had been innocent. The murders for which he had been convicted had been committed by Wormtail, Voldemort's supporter, whom nearly everyone now believed dead. Harry, Ron, and Hermione knew otherwise, however. They had come face to face with Wormtail the previous year, though only Professor Dumbledore had believed their story. For one glorious hour, Harry believed that he was leaving the Dursleys at last, because Sirius had offered him home once his name was cleared. But the chance had been snatched away from him. Wormtail had escaped before they could take him to the Ministry of Magic, and Sirius had had to flee for his life. Harry had helped him escape on the back of a hippogriff called Buckbeak, and since then, Sirius had been on the run. The home Harry might have had if Wormtail had not escaped had been haunting him all summer. It had been doubly hard to return to the Dursleys, knowing that he had so nearly escaped them forever. Nevertheless, Sirius had been of some help to Harry, even if he couldn't be with him. It was due to Sirius that Harry was now had all his school things in his bedroom with him. The Dursleys had never allowed this before. Their general wish of keeping Harry as miserable as possible, coupled with their fear of his powers, had led them to lock his school trunk in the cupboard under the stairs every summer prior to this. But their attitude had changed once they found out Harry had a dangerous murder for a godfather. Harry had conveniently forgotten to tell him that Sirius was innocent. Harry had received 2 letters from Sirius since he had been back at Privet Drive. Both had been delivered not by owls, as was usual with wizards, but by large, brightly coloured tropical birds. Hedwig did not approve of these flashy intruders. She was most reluctant to allow them to drink from her water tray before flying off again. Harry, on the other hand, had liked them. They put him in mind of palm trees, white sand, and he hoped that wherever Sirius was, Sirius never said, in case the letters were intercepted, that he was enjoying himself. However, somehow, Harry found it hard to imagine Dementors surviving for long in bright sunlight. Perhaps that was why Sirius had gone south. Sirius's letters, which were now hidden underneath the highly useful loose floorboard under Harry's bed, sounded cheerful, and in both of them he had reminded Harry to call on him if Harry ever needed to. Well, he needed to right now, all right. Harry's lamp seemed to grow dimmer in the grey light that precedes the sunrise, slowly crept into the room. Finally, when the sun had risen, when his bedroom walls had turned gold, and when the sounds of movement could be heard from Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia's room, Harry cleared his desk of crumpled pieces of parchment and reread his finished letter. Dear Sirius, thanks for your last letter. That bird was enormous. It could hardly get through my window. Things are the same as usual here. Dudley's diet isn't going too well. My aunt found him smuggling doughnuts into his room yesterday. They told him he'd have to cut his pocket money if he keeps doing it, so he got really angry and chucked his PlayStation out the window. It's a sort of computer thing that you can play games on. A bit stupid, really. Now he hasn't even got Mega Mutilation Part 3 to take his mind off things. I'm okay, mainly because the Dursleys are terrified you might show up and turn them into bats if I asked you to. A weird thing happened this morning, though. My scar hurt again. Last time that happened, it was because Voldemort was at Hogwarts, but I don't reckon he can be anywhere near me now, can he? Do you know if cursed scars sometimes hurt years afterwards? I'll send this with Hedwig when she gets back. She's off hunting at the moment. Say hello to Buckbeak for me, Harry. Yes, thought Harry, as that looked all right. There was no point in putting in the dream. He didn't want it to look as if he was too worried. He folded up the parchment, laid it aside on his desk, ready for when Hedwig returned. Then he got to his feet, stretched, and opened his wardrobe once more. Without glancing at his reflection, he started to get dressed before going down to breakfast. And that's the end of chapter 2.